I sat in the back row of the church for the entire funeral service, having slipped in unnoticed at the very beginning. I really didn't want to meet the family of the deceased at a wake and tell them that their deceased was a good person, especially because he wasn't. In fact, he was a son of a bitch and a scoundrel, and I, unlike many, was glad of his death. I only hoped that the last hours of his life were filled with physical pain to match the emotional pain he caused me years ago. The pastor stopped talking monotonously, and the service finally ended. The coffin was carried through the sanctuary to the main entrance, where it was to be loaded into a hearse. Relatives followed him, led by a widow. She was crying again. I don't know why, but when she approached the last row, she looked at me as if something was attracting her, as I had been smiling all morning. When she first looked at me, the widow looked shocked, probably because anyone could smile at her husband's funeral. But then I saw recognition appear in her eyes, and her expression of shock turned to rage. I continued to look at her without blinking until she finally turned away and walked towards the exit of the church. Her mother, who was following her, recognized me almost immediately, blushed deeply, and quickly looked straight ahead. At least someone in the family felt guilty for what happened. Today, I saw these women for the first time in more than 5 years. My anger has not subsided one iota. I found myself hoping that my ex-wife would die before me so that I could go to her funeral. More than 6 years ago, she and I were a great couple. We were married for 10 wonderful years. She was a respected lawyer working for one of the best firms on our East Coast, and I was the most successful real estate developer in our state, earning more than the illustrious Tracy Conroy. And then the deceased, still alive then, decided to destroy my life. Although, to be honest, I think he wasn't out to ruin my life. I just ended up being collateral damage in his quest to get my wife back. He didn't care that anyone got in his way. Tracy and another young lawyer came to an exhibition of a group of emerging artists. I was there representing the construction company I was working for at the time, Watford Group, which sponsored the event. I was 24 years old, I made good money, I was in good shape and didn't look too bad, and I used all this to my advantage, building up a reputation as a ladies' man. It all ended when I saw Tracy Truman. I felt like lightning struck my head and went all the way to my heels. She was gorgeous. Long blonde hair that reached the middle of her back, cobalt blue eyes, an angelic face with thick red lips, and the body of a goddess. While she was talking to her friend, she smiled in my direction, and I'm pretty sure my heart skipped a beat. I grabbed 2 glasses of Chablis and a shot of Don Julio tequila from the bar, walked up to the couple, and introduced myself. I apologized for my impudence, but they both accepted glasses of wine when I offered them. We chatted for a few minutes and then began to look around the exhibition, looking at the paintings. I learned that Tracy and Lenore Gold were roommates and friends, and both were better at art than I was. But I'm a quick learner, and I think they were impressed that I not only stayed on level, but also contributed something to the conversation. I had a wonderful evening in the company of both women, but from the very beginning I had my sights set on Tracy, and before we broke up that night I asked for and received her phone number. I acted calmly and didn't call for about a week to ask her out for dinner, but she acted even calmer and turned me down. She actually turned me down 6 times before she finally agreed, and I think she only agreed to get me to stop asking. If she expected me to give up, she was going to learn a lesson. We had a great time, or at least I thought we did. We went to a great steakhouse and then to a nightclub. I don't Savvy and Glover, but I can hold my own on the dance floor, and I know I was better than her. But at the end of the night, I only received a polite handshake when I walked her to the apartment door, and she declined a second date. Broken, certainly. I decided to play a timed game and didn't call her for another 2 weeks. This time, she accepted my invitation to a string quartet concert and late dinner. At the end of the night, I received a kiss, and she accepted the invitation for the next week. We continued this chaste, tentative relationship for the next 6 months. I was head over heels in love with the Tracy she let me know, but I knew she was hiding something. I hoped that the reason she wasn't showing emotion was because she didn't feel the same spark as me and was trying to be gentle. Apparently, she wasn't going to tell me, so I had to make up my mind. I didn't ask her out the following week, so on Wednesday of that week, I called the law firm and left her a message that we needed to talk. They called me back within 10 minutes. "Jimmy, did something happen? You sounded so serious," she said. "Tracy, we really need to talk. Let's meet at my house at 8 today." "Okay, Jimmy, at your house at 8. Even though we had been dating for over 6 months, Tracy had only been to my house a few times, and when she was there, she didn't seem comfortable. But we needed to be in a quiet place with no distractions because I needed to know if our relationship had a future. Tracy was on time in jeans and a sweatshirt, looking very nervous. I invited her in and asked if she wanted something to drink, which she declined. I led her into the living room, sat her down on the sofa, and sat opposite her, about 2 feet away. "I don't have to know everything, but I need to know enough to know if we have a chance to continue," I told her. "I love you more and more every time we meet, but I'm not sure if you feel the same." Tracy burst into tears at that moment, and I leaned over and hugged her. She cried for several minutes before she stood up and looked me in the eyes. "Jim, the relationship before ours ended badly for me, and frankly, I was afraid to get into another," she said. "I guess it's time to move on because you've shown me that you're not like him. And honestly, I think I might be falling in love with you." I felt like my heart was going to pound out of my chest, and I'm pretty sure I heard angels singing in the distance. I knew I would marry this woman. 3 months later, she brought me home to meet my parents and the rest of the family, and that weekend I proposed and gave her a diamond ring. She said yes without hesitation, and I was over the moon, which helped me overcome the feeling that something was wrong. Tracy's parents seemed nice enough, but not very warm towards me, which I chalked up to the fact that we had just met. Her older sister Leslie, on the other hand, seemed like an ally to me, and she and her husband, Stephen, welcomed me with open arms. Tracy's parents lived in a slightly smaller city on the East Coast, 2 hours away, close enough that we could easily visit them, but not so close that we were too close. Since the wedding was to take place at Tracy's parents' church, she and her mother spent a lot of time planning everything together, and Tracy often went home for the entire weekend. Sometimes I went with her, but more often than not I felt like I was in the way, so I went to Les and Steve, who lived about 15 minutes away, to hang out and have a beer. With the exception of the sudden death of my father-in-law Mel at 68 from a heart attack about 5 years after our wedding, our life was virtually perfect. Yes, we had our problems like all couples, but mostly it was too good to be true. Yes, sometimes our jobs made it difficult to spend much time together, but Tracy was quickly becoming a sought-after lawyer in our city, and I was at the top of the construction business. The only thing we were missing was children, although we tried, but apparently not everyone is lucky. And then came her mother's 70th birthday. Tracy and Les had been secretly planning the party, and when Alva arrived at Les and Steve's expecting a quiet family dinner, she was in for a surprise. 50 friends and family who had come to wish her a happy birthday. People came and went all day. I was talking to Steve at the side of the living room when I heard Tracy make a little squeal at the front door. When I turned around to see what had happened, I saw her jump on the neck of a man about our age. He caught her easily, and they hugged tightly. I didn't think much of it, thinking it was an old family friend who had come to congratulate Alva, but I noticed that when I caught Alva's eye, she blushed. Or so it seemed to me. I wanted to continue talking to Steve, but he had already walked away, so I went to the bar for another bottle of beer. I'm not a jealous person, but several times when I looked in Tracy's direction, she seemed engrossed in conversation with that man. She constantly touched his arm, and at one point he put his arm around her shoulders. At this point, I headed towards my wife, but I was distracted by Alva, who asked me to come and meet my third cousin or someone else. I never got to Tracy, and soon she and the man disappeared from my sight. With everything going on, I hadn't seen Tracy for about an hour, so I went looking for her. I found her and her friend, his hand still on her shoulder, talking to another couple I didn't know. Perhaps it was my imagination, but it seemed to me that the conversation became quieter as I approached. I walked up behind Tracy and her friend and, without making a big deal out of it, removed his hand from her shoulder. He started to move towards me, but Tracy deftly stepped between us, doing it almost naturally. Jason Bettendorf, Beth, let me introduce you to my dear husband, Jim Conroy. Jim, Jason, and I have known each other since the 4th grade, when his parents moved to our area. Jason, Jim and I have been married for 10 wonderful years, she said, pointing to the rings on her fingers. Although I wasn't happy with his attitude, I wasn't going to make a scene at my mother-in-law's 70th birthday. I shook his hand firmly, smiled slightly, and then walked back to the bar. As I turned, I caught Tracy's eyebrows raised. On the way home, Tracy and I discussed the party, but Jason Bettendorf was never mentioned. I chalked up my early anxiety to being overtired and didn't bring it up on the way home. 2 weeks after the party, Tracy told me that she was going to spend more time at her mother's every few weeks, arriving on Saturday morning and staying until mid-afternoon on Sunday because she missed her and knew Alva wouldn't be with us forever. Having lost both my parents in my early 20s, I completely understood her desire to spend time with her mother and did not object. Sometimes I went with her, but more often she went alone. When she was away alone, we usually spent a wild night on Friday to make up for each other's weekend absences. 6 months after the party, I received a call from Lisa at All About Flooring, who was looking for Tracy. Tracy was ordering new tiles for her kitchen, and Lisa wanted to ask her a few questions. Since it was not my project, I did not know the details to answer her. I've called her cell phone several times, but it goes straight to voicemail like she turned it off, Lisa said. That's impossible. She always has her phone on unless we're completely disconnected from everything, like on vacation, I answered. I'll call her or find her and ask her to call you back. Her phone was actually off when I tried to call, so I called Alva's home number and asked for Tracy. Why don't you call her on her cell phone? Alva asked sharply. I tried, but the phone is off, I replied. Can you call her? She's not at home right now. She went for a walk, Alva stammered. Let me give her a message. I knew Alva was trying to cover for Tracy, but she was a bad liar. Just ask her to call me back when she gets back, okay? My sixth sense did not let me down. Mom, I said quietly before hanging up, tell me at least one truth. Does she at least visit you when she comes? At least for a few minutes, Alva answered just as quietly. Tracy finally called me back an hour later from her cell phone. Sorry, honey, I was charging my phone. I was walking around my mom's neighborhood stretching my legs when you called. What happened? We have to give her credit. She was damn calm, and, not knowing that Alva couldn't lie, she thought she was continuing to play her game. My heart was breaking, but I kept it to myself and told her to call Lisa back about the tiles. Okay, honey, I'll do it. Thank you. We have to run. When Tracy ended the call, I immediately called my sister-in-law. Tell me everything. Now. Who is this Jason Bettendorf to Tracy? I asked sharply, without introducing myself. I heard Leslie gasp, and then there was a long silence. I didn't interrupt him, waiting for an answer. What can I tell you? You met him at your mom's birthday party a few months ago. Tracy and I have known him for a long time. His family moved to our area when he was about 9 years old. Now tell me what you and Tracy don't want me to know, I screamed into the phone. It's ancient history, Jim, Leslie began to protest. No, it's not like that. This feels like the end of my marriage, I exclaimed in despair. Wait, what do you think is going on? Leslie asked with real concern in her voice. My wife spends a few weekends a month in your city under the pretext of visiting her mother, but I'm sure she doesn't spend much time there. Now, who is this guy? This is the guy who almost ruined Tracy. I thought she already told you, Leslie began. She didn't tell me much about her past love, and I thought it was none of my business. I didn't tell her about mine either. Jimmy, I think Tracy fell in love with Bat from the moment he moved into our street. He was a year older than me and a year younger than her, and I think she practically followed him around like a puppy, almost from the beginning. They dated all through high school, and our families were always close. I think everyone just assumed they'd get married right after she graduated from college. Since he was a year older, he graduated a year before her, and she would have had to go to law school for 2 more years. But right before her last year of college, Beth had simply disappeared for a few weeks. Both families were shocked and did everything they could to find him. But 2 weeks later, he simply returned. Without explanation, with his wife in tow. Tracy, more than anyone, was simply devastated. I think she cried for 2 weeks straight before she went back to Cornell for her senior year. I don't think she dated anyone until you came along 3 years later. Jimmy, there has to be some logical explanation for all of this. She loves you completely, and I can't imagine her going back to that bastard. I thanked Leslie for her honesty. I also asked her not to tell Tracy anything. Although the facts looked very bad, I had no proof of her infidelity and may have missed something. I knew it was stupid to hope, but I had to give her a chance, no matter how small it was. Tracy returned home late Sunday night as usual, serenely saying hi and heading upstairs to take a shower. I used to laugh at her, wash away the road dust line, but now that I was pretty sure it was the smell of sex and not dust, I didn't respond as usual. As a top lawyer, Tracy was good at reading people, and I'm sure she sensed something was wrong between us. She immediately came up to me and kissed me when she came back downstairs, but then somehow drifted to the other side of the room and started reading the Sunday newspaper. She was usually talkative when she came downstairs, but today it seemed like there was a little less air in the room than usual. She mentioned that she would call Lisa about the tiles in the kitchen and quickly apologized that the phone was off when I tried to call her. The next week the house was quiet. There was almost no talking between us. I'm sure Tracy saw that I was out of my element, but she never made an attempt to initiate anything that could solve the problem. I wasn't sure if she thought I was that stupid or if she just didn't want to start something that would lead to a divorce. The first thing I did on Monday morning was to call my lawyer and ask him to prepare the divorce papers. For 10 years, Tracy was my soul, the light of my life. It was as if they stuck a knife into my heart and twisted it. Tracy didn't go to her mom for the next 3 weeks, but she couldn't hold out for a month. She told me she missed her mom a lot and had planned a trip for the coming weekend. I muttered in response and sent the address to the detective. We also agreed to meet at my office on Monday morning. I didn't have to call her that weekend, so it was business as usual when she returned on Sunday night. First, she took a shower and then came up to me with a kiss. She was chatty again, talking about her visit to Alva and what happened over the weekend. Now that I knew it was all rehearsed, I pretended to be interested and even asked a few questions. It took her by surprise, but being a good lawyer, she handled it quite well. Unfortunately for me, the meeting with the private investigator went exactly as I expected. Yes, she slept with Jason Battendorf most of the weekend, spending about an hour at Alva's early Saturday before heading to Jason's apartment. I don't know how, but the detective somehow got into Jason's apartment and installed a series of hidden cameras with audio recordings. He also took some photographs. I watched enough videos to hear them talk as if they were in high school again. Then I looked at the photos. Apparently, during these 10 years, I simply held his place. I probably sat there staring at those photos for about 2 minutes, with tears in my eyes, until my detective brought me out of my stupor. "I'll give you time to digest this, Mr. Conroy. I'll come out myself," he said. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I lurched toward my private bathroom, leaned over the toilet, and puked up last night's dinner. And maybe lunch, too. It was an epic vomit. Although I expected it to hurt, I was not prepared for how to handle it. My life as I knew it ceased to exist. But no matter how devastated I was, it was hard to stop loving someone, no matter how angry and hurt I was. Our anniversary was just a week away, and as per tradition, we had dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant on Friday night after work, and then danced and had sex. Although I assumed sex could be left out, maybe if I brought her into a romantic, nostalgic setting, we could have a heart-to-heart and maybe try to fix the situation or at least start working on it. My marriage ended on March 30th, 11 years and 2 days after it began. We booked a table for 7 p.m. at Maricelli for the Friday night after our anniversary. I stopped at a local flower shop and bought a dozen red roses and arrived at the restaurant at 6:55 p.m. The hostess sat me down and I ordered a bottle of champagne. 7 hours have passed. I ordered an appetizer at 7:30 p.m. 8 hours have passed. I handed over my table at 8:15 p.m., leaving the waiter a generous tip and moving to the bar. At 21 as I called her, but the phone was switched off as it went straight to voicemail. At 10 p.m., I asked the bartender to call me a taxi as I had too much to drink to drive safely. I tipped him generously and got into a taxi for the longest ride home I've ever made. My house was dark when I arrived. I haven't heard a word from Tracy all weekend. I didn't try to call her anymore. I just sat in the house and drank, finishing off a bottle of monkey shoulder scotch on Saturday and a bottle of Angel's Envy rye whiskey on Sunday. At approximately 4 p.m., she returned, bag in hand, quickly announcing that she was going to take a shower to wash off the travel dust. I got up from the couch and walked over to her before she could react. "Did you go to your mom's a little earlier this weekend?" I hissed angrily when she began to back away. I know my breath smelled like rye whiskey and whatever I found in the fridge for lunch. She turned and walked into the living room to give herself some space. Then she noticed it, although I think she felt it first. It was a box of Maricelli food that I placed on her favorite low table opposite the sofa. The box was still closed, but it had been there for almost 2 days and smelled rather unpleasant. Next to her lay withered roses. She looked dumbfounded. There was understanding in her eyes. Mom had a problem that needed to be solved. She began, but I raised both hands to stop her. I've never been this close to hitting a woman before. Instead, I reached for the folder next to the roses, opened it, and scattered photographs of her and Beta. "You're a liar, a traitor," I hissed. "He almost destroyed you, and now you let him destroy us. I loved you with everything I had, and I thought you loved me the same, but now I understand that you loved him more. You left us for him. You stupid bitch." Tracy looked scared and shocked. I've never spoken to her like that before. I think she was afraid that I might hit her. I love you, Jimmy," she finally screamed. "I love you both. I'm sorry. He was my first." "And he's still first," I interrupted. "Go to him. I won't stand in your way. In fact, I can't see you. Pack another bag and get out of here. Come back when I'm gone and take everything you want to keep. And this tells him because it doesn't mean anything to me anymore, you bitch." With that, I took off my wedding ring and threw it to her. She didn't catch it, of course, and it fell to the floor. She left it there, ran upstairs to our bedroom, and threw things into a large suitcase. I glared at her as she walked down the stairs. "You completely destroyed me, bitch. I fully understand that you worship the ground this bastard walks on, because that's how I loved you. Completely. Uncontrollably. Entirely. But apparently that's not enough. You'll come back to this piece of shit who once left you and married someone else. Has he ever sincerely apologized to you for this?" She ran out of the house in tears. I did not care. The divorce took about 9 months. We split everything equally since it was a no-fault divorce state. I let my lawyer handle everything and only showed up for the official signing of the divorce papers. Probably out of guilt, she did not ask for alimony, although she could have. Even though she made good money as an attorney, I made significantly more, and I was already preparing for the fact that we would have to split the income since we lived in a no-fault divorce state, so it was a pleasant surprise. I hadn't seen Tracy in 4 years since the funeral, when she showed up at a bar I frequented. In fact, I didn't see her, but one of my friends did when her date started acting brazen one Saturday night. "Hey, isn't that your ex-wife with that big jerk over there?" said my friend Brad. I turned around to see what he was pointing at, and sure enough some huge bastard was holding Tracy's hand, and they seemed to be arguing. I watched for about 30 seconds and saw that it was clear from her face that they were quarreling, and despite all her efforts, she could not free herself from his grip. He was huge, about 6 feet 4 inches and 225 pounds. I'm 6 feet and 180 pounds myself, and although I'm in good shape, I've only been in one fight in my entire life, and that one I lost. I hoped he would take the hint and it wouldn't come to that. Brad saw that I was not eager to get involved and asked if I needed help. No, there's no point in both of them getting hurt if it comes down to it. I walked up to their table and asked if there was a problem. Tracy looked at me like a deer in headlights, but the big idiot didn't even turn his head and just grinned. Not unless you want to get broken ribs, little man. Listen, buddy, I said as politely as possible. This is my ex-wife you've got your hands on, and I probably hate that bitch more than anyone. But if I can't treat her like that, then no one can, okay? If she's your ex, why would you even care? He snapped. Because even a bitch doesn't deserve this kind of crap. Now get your hands off, you asshole. There was a fight. Luckily, I had witnesses who saw him hit me first, otherwise I probably would have gone to jail. Before my friends took me to the hospital, I had to answer a bunch of questions from 2 police officers who arrived with paramedics and an ambulance. After they finished, Tracy stood to the side, waiting to talk to me. She approached timidly. "Do you really hate me so much that you can't be polite to me in public?" she asked quietly. "I know you were yelling at Ernie, my date, but I understood what you were telling me. Do you really still hate me after all these years?" I lowered my eyes. "Yes, I still hate you, but only because I loved you so much. The way you love Beta completely, unconditionally, with all my soul and heart, that's how I loved you. But you deceived me, cheated on me, and showed that you are his, and not mine. How can I not hate you?" "But we had 10 good years together. Doesn't that count?" she asked. "You just don't understand. You had 10 good years with me while I held the place for Beta. I may have thought we had 10 good years together, but as it turns out, that was a lie. You stole 10 years of love from me." I had to see 2 therapists after what my friends called the Tracy incident. The first was to work on my anger issues. The 2 police officers at the scene said they would only give me a written warning if I agreed to see a therapist and would not press criminal charges. Dr. Seth Friedman was a nice enough guy, and I think he helped me with my anger and trust issues in the long run. The second therapist was for the rehabilitation of my hand. Although surgery was not required, the 2 fractures took long enough to heal that my doctor thought physical therapy would be helpful, and who am I to argue? So I started working with Lucy Yamaguchi, a therapist at the hospital, twice a week. Lucy seemed to me to be a 20-year-old Asian woman who looked like a Chinese gymnast, 4 feet 10 inches tall, 90 pounds, with short hair and no breasts. She was far from my type, but that was fine with me because after my divorce, I wasn't really looking for a partner, remember? I had trust issues. When you spend 2 hours a week with someone, conversations inevitably start, and ours started with her asking how I broke my arm so badly. Being an honest person, I gave her the short version of events. She looked shocked, to say the least. "And you say you don't even love this woman? I find that hard to believe," she said frankly. "It seems like there's a lot more to it than you want to admit." "My other therapist, the one who deals with my head, says the same thing," I admitted. "I'm working with a psychologist on anger and trust issues." "Don't even talk to me about trust issues," she replied. "I think I have those too. My ex-husband couldn't resist other women, so we got divorced 6 years ago. I won't tolerate that from anyone." We talked about a lot of things over the next 6 weeks while I rehabbed my hand. I learned that she was actually 37 years old, but with her flawless porcelain skin, childish hairstyle, and the fact that she didn't have an ounce of fat on her body, she was always asked to show ID when she wanted to have a drink at a bar or restaurant. She was married to her ex for 8 years before they divorced, and like Tracy and I, they had no children. I found that I really enjoyed her company, and after my last official rehab session, I asked if we could continue to see each other after hours. She hesitated for about a second, then smiled her charming smile and said yes. I asked her out the following weekend, and she said yes, as long as I didn't take her to an Asian restaurant. I guess I was a little surprised by her comment because she got a mischievous glint in her eye and clicked her tongue and said, "Gotcha, handsome." The game has begun, I thought to myself. Lucy and I had been dating for almost 6 months before we got intimate for the first time, and it was only because she was disappointed with how slowly I was moving. She made some sarcastic comment, and I leaned over to her in a restaurant and gave her a kiss on the lips. "Okay, honey, am I missing something? You don't like me. You're killing me," she said. I faltered. I stuttered. "Honestly, this will sound stupid, but you look too young, and I look all 45 years old. I get a lot of strange looks when we go somewhere." "So now you've added shame to the anger and trust issues," she answered. "Be a man, Jimmy. To quote Meg Ryan from Top Gun, take me to bed or lose me forever." I called our waitress, gave her $150 for the bill for about $85, and we left. Before I met Tracy, I was pretty good with women, but not so successful after my divorce, again due to trust issues. But with this charming girl putting me on the clock, I realized it was time to act. I brought her to my home, and we spent that night together. After the shower, I made us breakfast. I'm a pretty good cook, and I think she was impressed. We talked a little while eating, just smiling at each other often, as if they knew a joke that no one else knew. Sometimes silence needs to be filled. This one was good on its own. And then I saw it, that same look. The same look that Tracy once gave Beta, and who told me that he was the first in her heart, and I would never be. But this time it was Lucy's gaze, and it was directed at me. She put a piece of food in her mouth, chewed quietly, and just looked at me with the most sincere love in her eyes that I had ever seen. I did the only thing I could. I took her hand and asked if she wanted to be with me for the rest of her life. "Wait, what?" she replied, almost choking on her food. "I know last night was special for me too, but isn't this going too fast? What happened to your trust issues?" "Last night was special for me, but that's not the point. Let's just say you passed the breakfast test with flying colors," I said. "You're serious, aren't you?" she asked, looking me straight in the eyes. "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied. Then a flood of tears began, and Lucy burst into tears, turning into a sobbing ball. "Oh God, I love you so much," I think I heard come out of her mouth as she climbed over the table and began hugging me with all her might. She cried like a baby in my arms for about 5 minutes. I admit I was stunned. When she finally stopped crying, she pulled back a little, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You will make breakfast every day." "Agree," I answered immediately. She never asked what the breakfast test was, and I never explained. All I will say is that I have seen that look of adoration many times over the years, and every time I saw it, I knew I made the right choice. We waited 2 years after our wedding to have our first child, a daughter, and 2 years later we had a son. Lucy stopped working as soon as we found out she was pregnant with her first child. We didn't need money at all. I was holding the door for Lucy at one of the best restaurants in our city on Saturday night when a couple approached, and I invited them to come in too. The man looked about 10 years older than me, but the woman was about my age, 55. As they walked by, I thought she looked familiar, but I knew a lot of people, so I didn't notice until she stopped right in front of me and said, "You still hate me so much you can't be polite in public?" I recognized the voice immediately, but I had to look closely to be sure, because she looked nothing like the Tracy I had seen. About 10 years ago. There were more wrinkles on her face, and she looked about 25 pounds heavier. I tried not to look surprised, but I'm sure I failed. "Tracy, sorry, I didn't notice," I muttered. "I wasn't trying to ignore you." As for hatred, well, a lot of time has passed. I think I've already let go of at least some of it. By this time, we were all already inside. I introduced Lucy to Tracy, and then we were introduced to John Bartholomew, Tracy's date for the evening. It seems that 2 husbands was the limit for Tracy. "Whatever you do tonight, John, don't put your hands on me in front of my ex. It didn't end well for the last guy." Tracy said it as a joke, but it was true. "But things worked out really well for me, Tracy. Guess who was my rehab therapist after I broke my arm punching that guy who grabbed you at the restaurant that night? I pointed to Lucy, who blushed demurely. So I guess I owe you more than I can repay. You gave me the greatest heartbreak of my life, and then became the instrument that led me to the love of my life. All in all, I think the scales are balanced. At least for some of us, Jimmy. At least for some of us. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click